Hi, and welcome to the Generation Gap podcast. I'm Mary French Murphy.
And I'm Bill French. I'm Mary's grandfather, and we're here to kind of talk about a number of things.
Yeah, today our topic is going to be focused on humor and what makes good humor. What is the role of humor? Where does humor go too far, if it does? That's what we're going to be unpacking today.
Yeah, it's interesting because when you look at humor, being my age, I mean, some of the humor that 60s, 70s, and all that, you know, were not politically correct. As a matter of fact, some of you are probably accused of being racist and those kind of things. But I'm not sure. Like, for some reason, I didn't think of it that way. But, when you get to reflect on things later in life, say, oh, okay, that was inappropriate. And I guess kind of the best examples I would use two great comedians from the past, Don Rickles and Rodney Dangerfield. And they were both Jewish, and they had some of the most fantastic jokes, but kind of making fun of themselves. And I'm not sure if that's got lost in the translation over the years. So, that's the way I would start.
Our family has always been a family that loves comedy and enjoys sharing our favorite comic clips with each other whenever we get together for dinner. So, as a backstory, we very much so love comedy and comedians, and we always joke that we're our own comedians in our family
Yeah.
as well. So we're really excited to dive into this type of topic, I think. But I really think it's interesting because comedy seems to be like since forever growing up watching all these comedy clips is there's a lot of topics or visually, like when we're looking at AFE and
Oh,
you
yeah.
know, even that, right? Going back and some of those things, I hope they turned out okay. Like,
Yeah.
I hope they're alive. But even in terms of subject matter, too, you can see people touching on things that you would never really see discussed otherwise.
Right.
Or if they were they're touchy subjects. You can't come out of those conversations generally without somebody having their feelings hurt or feeling offended, especially these days. But I think that that's why comedy is such an important thing to talk about because when we talk about free speech, one of the places where free speech is holding on the longest, I think, is in comedy. So there's a power in that. And like you said, is that something that's, I guess, from what I understand what you're
Yeah.
saying is that something that's more abused or is that something that is a good thing like that there's that space for that space for conversation and maybe poking fun at subjects that usually we can't really talk about without keeping a level head. So, I don't know, what are your thoughts on
Yeah.
that?
No, as a matter of fact, when it comes to comedy, some of the greatest comedy is satire.
Mhm.
And, when you think of Saturday Night Live, and we used to have a Canadian show, Second City, it was all satire. They made fun of people. And as a matter of fact, I saw an interview, obviously with the rise of the political divide, let's say in the U.S. for the most part, left and right. Um, it was interesting. I saw an interview with Jay Leno. And Jay Leno basically has questioned the modern day late night show comedians
Mm.
who have decided to strictly focus on what he considers the left.
Mm.
And he says he knew he had a good opening monologue in his days when he got complaints from both sides. And so his attitude is with the modern comics, especially the late night ones, like Jimmy Kimmel's and
Jimmy
Jimmy
Fallon.
Fallon and those kind of things. Jimmy Fallon is probably the closest to Jay Leno,
Mm.
probably because he took over the Late Show or whatever. But his point was, as a comedian, why do you want to offend half your audience, like on a consistent basis? He said, you're losing half your audience.
Mm.
And when you look at it, he's right, because late show ratings for the late night shows are terrible.
Mm.
Like, as a matter of fact, a lot of them are being canceled and that because they're only appealing to a minority.
Mm.
And it's kind of interesting. I wonder if that'll change. I think, and again, I don't want to give Donald Trump credit for anything, but the reality is, I think certain comedy is coming back. Like, comedians aren't analyzing every word of whatever their monologue or their delivery is.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they're being sensitive, which is probably very, very appropriate, but they don't analyze every single word. Um, you know, for the word police, and we've allowed, especially in Canada, we've allowed the word police to
Yep.
monitor and control everything.
Yeah.
And I think, that's where free speech has gone also.
Yeah. I think it's very interesting how even comedians can poke fun at those types of things and still, and even when it comes to, so there's private personal matters, right? In the sense of matters that hit close to home for certain people, right? Whether that be what you would fall into racism
Right.
category, et cetera, right? But then there's also larger scale, like political items as well, that you see these satire and you see this comedy and even satirical shows like, let's say, Family Guy
Right.
or things like that. It shocks me that they're able to openly discuss and openly make fun of so many big things, like
Yeah.
big things that are impacting, like government things, social issues, propaganda, all of that kind of stuff. I think it's so fascinating to me that even those are untouched. I'm like, whoa, what magic,
Yeah.
what magic aura is
Umbrella.
around
Yeah.
these
Yeah.
comedians. It's funny, but yeah, I think it's interesting, and I think that the good thing about comedy is you can take a subject that for a lot of people carries a lot of weight behind it because of, I don't know, these conversations where you're being judged harshly or people won't let you finish your thoughts, or every time you go into a conversation about it, you know it's going to be heavy. And so to hear those things said in a comedic place, I think there's this beautiful catharsis behind it where you can actually just, relieve some of the tension behind it.
Yeah.
And I think that's where it's important that that's the purpose of comedy. It's not necessarily to make a political stance or to make an opinion that is is going to have an impact on people. I think it's just to,
Yeah.
let it go. So I think that's the beauty of comedy. I think that where it would cross the line to something else is if somebody were to say these jokes with a sense of seriousness
Yeah.
behind it. I think a good comedian, you don't know where they actually stand on
Right.
things,
Right.
right? They say a joke, but there's this sense of, are are they on this side or that side? I really don't know, and I think that's an important thing with comedy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, and that's a very good point. And I think it's happened with comedians and Hollywood actors. Basically, probably up until 10, 15 years ago, if you went to a comedy show or you ran into an, you had no idea where they stood politically. And because it didn't matter
Hmm.
in their profession or whatever. And
Mm-hmm.
as a matter of fact, most comedians purposely, if they went into the political arena
Mm-hmm.
with their monologues or their comedy show, they purposely offended both sides,
Mm.
so it was neutralized. And also the one thing I haven't liked, because I do when I see a comedy show on, I want to watch it, and I am, and there's always been crude comedians. Don't get
Mm-hmm.
me wrong; they've been around forever,
Mm-hmm.
but there seems to be a real shift to crude jokes,
Yeah.
and to me, those aren't comedians. They're just locker room whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And like that's why I love the likes of the as I said, the Rodney Dangerfields and the Don Rickles and all that. They were funny. Joan Rivers, she did a lot of inappropriate jokes about women, and she was a woman, of course. But she was hilarious, and she'd wander in both sides of the political spectrum and make fun of everybody. And I think it has something to do with, again, over the last probably 30 years, where we started, you know, promoting, diversity.
Mm-hmm.
To me, is not it's almost disunity.
Mm.
Like everybody's got to sit in a little square box, and the square boxes conflict with each other. I happen to be reading a book right now on something totally different, but I understand the same thing, how it's affected, and we talked about minimum wage and all that. Um, yeah, well, why is it to that point? And basically, the book's called, I can't remember what it's called, but it deals with the social contract that basically lived forever
Mm.
in industrialized countries until, basically globalization, and how diversity has actually negatively impacted like a worker. So I think the same things happen in comedy. You know, like where comedians now, I think some of them are very afraid. They don't want to offend people, and many of them have attached themselves to a particular group. And unfortunately, there's so many groups now.
Mm.
When you attach yourself to it, well, if you attach yourself to one group, there's a good chance you're going to offend 80% of the rest of them. And like, and I remember jokingly, like 25 years ago, I said, well, pretty soon they'll have thought police. Well, they do.
Mm.
They have word police, and we're not allowed to think certain ways. And I think that's really impacted comedy. But we need comedy more today
Mm-hmm.
than we've ever need, because we need light-hearted movements.
Yeah.
And I think I'm hoping Hollywood has learned a bit in the last 10 years, because box office is not down. Do more good, funny comedy shows.
Yeah.
They're just funny. Yeah.
It's a good thing even within a family environment too. Or like when you hear stories like who's the comic relief in this story,
Yeah.
right? We need a little bit of that comic relief in order to bridge some gaps
Yeah.
within family life,
Yeah.
etc. Right? No, there's a difference, I believe, between throwing out a well landed joke and pushing buttons under the guise of
Yeah.
this is a joke.
Yeah.
Obviously, there's a difference there. But well placed, balanced humor, I think, is a very powerful thing. And I think that a thing that is important we do not lose. Because when we stop laughing, and it's so funny because I remember even when COVID hit,
Oh yeah.
when it was first declared a pandemic, and back then people didn't know what was going on, right? So there was a lot of fear behind it. And the very first case came to Canada. But even still, regardless, I don't know if it's just Barrie, but the Facebook groups were all like meme after meme after joke. And I'm like, and everyone's like, this generation is so unserious. I'm like, well, maybe we kind of have to be a little
Yeah.
bit because of how chaotic everything is. I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, to be honest, because if we don't laugh, if we don't keep our spirits up, then what do we do, right? And then my other point I wanted to make as well when it comes to comedy shows and everything entailed with that is, first of all, it's a place where you can make jokes about serious subjects, but it's also something that people choose to do, right? So you can't be offended because you're signing yourself up for this, right?
Yeah.
Like, you have to be ready to be a little bit offended by a joke,
Yeah.
right? And know that it's just a joke. Like, that's the important premise behind it. It is a joke. It's meant to, release the stress and create more of a relaxed environment. And when people are more relaxed, then people can come together more, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's the power of good comedy.
Yeah.
Right there.
And it's kind of interesting. Like I'm curious. Obviously, your generation. I mean, we didn't analyze everything. Like like your parents didn't analyze everything. I didn't. We kind of take it at first value, and sometimes you want to dig into it. But I do feel that your generation and the younger ones, like they've been taught that, oh, you have to analyze everything that anybody ever says.
Hmm.
And I'd still be curious, and what research and that's been done. I just wonder how much mental health, you know, depression and all that is caused because people don't know how to laugh, you know, and I'd love to see the research on it because there's a lot more problems with mental health now. Like some of them in the past weren't exposed, but across the board, there's a lot more issues today, and it's almost a hypersensitivity to everything. Like, you know, you got to analyze what did he really mean by that, you know, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'll tell you, that's stressful.
That's not a good thing for your
Yeah,
psyche.
yeah.
No.
Like I don't do it. Some things. Oh, okay. I wonder what that's all about. But for the most part, I'll take things at face value, and if it doesn't seem to be harmful or whatever, or going in a negative direction, who cares?
Hmm.
So I don't dig into it more deeply. Like I notice yourself and your siblings and everybody your age do look at things more seriously.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's good or bad. You know, like you shouldn't be dismissive, which I probably am in a lot of subjects, but, you know, but also I can laugh. I love a good joke. I don't like crude jokes. I don't mind jokes with a bit of an edge and, you know, that kind of thing, but I just don't like deep rooted, crude jokes.
Yeah.
You know, but comedy, I think, it's good for our soul and good for our health.
Yeah.
Uh,
No, it's interesting that you were saying that because I really do believe with all of the information we have available to us now, human beings were not designed to take on all the heaviness of every single thing going on in the world. I think that leads to a lot of emotional burnout, and that can be why we can know that there's wars, there's massacres in other sides of the world, and kind of be able to be removed from that's possible, I believe, because we're so oversaturated with
yeah,
all the heaviness going on in the world that there's just kind of this, like I said, burnout. Like,
yeah,
that's a lot, right? And then going on to our own personal climate is noting how, okay, I have to walk on eggshells sometimes to make sure I'm saying things correctly and I'm not offending people because I really want their best interest, but at the same time, how do I voice my opinion without sounding like I hate someone, right? So
yeah,
it's a lot. People of our generation, not to mention also the economic change and all the stress of how that's going to play out. People in my generation are going through a lot. They're carrying a lot mentally and everything else, right? So I think it's interesting, and the reason why this is going to circle back and make sense. But I think when you go back and you look at comedy throughout the years, comedy is kind of like literature in the sense that it can be a good tell of what was going on in that period, what was important, what were the underlying emotional issues and the bigger social
right.
issues. If you look back throughout the years, I think comedy is a pretty good tell of a lot of those things. So, what's comedy today? Well, we've got a good range of comics today. I think it's very interesting. The generation below mine, their go to comedy is called Brain Rot.
Oh,
Have you heard of this?
no, you better explain that.
Okay, so, oh my goodness. Um, so I try to understand from my brothers a good sense of it, but essentially it's like saying nonsense words in nonsense situations and finding it funny,
Oh,
which I kind of get, but at the same time, I just find it curious. Well, why is that what we're finding funny? And I think it's something you could overanalyze or read into too much, but I just think it's very interesting. Like, is it we're at a point where everything is so overwhelming that you just kind of laugh at nothing, you know?
yeah.
I just think that's interesting.
Yeah. Well, and actually, I guess I just thought of this. I guess if you think over the years, even the last 100 years, um, probably comedy went from kind of visual body gestures and that from the gestures in court at 1,000 years ago, to the word comedy probably in the last 50 years.
Mm.
Because there's always been comedy, but it was kind of more body movements or actions or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, we're probably going through a transition. And maybe my judge of comedy, which is really funny people saying things,
Mm.
there's probably a lot more to it. You
Mm-hmm.
know, like when you think of, you probably never seen them. You have to be around my age but I remember the most hilarious thing were the Three Stooges. You know,
Yeah.
and but it was all body
Mm-hmm.
humor,
Mm-hmm.
like doing stupid things and
Mm-hmm.
so forth, like that. So comedy has transitioned.
Mm-hmm.
I think probably the launch of nightclubs in Las Vegas has probably created the stand-up comedian
Mm.
rather than comedic groups. And I guess
Mm-hmm.
Saturday Night Live, and as I said, they probably brought back the comedic groups
Mm.
where there wasn't one superstar,
Mm.
and the antics they did, you know, um, like what's Chris Farley. You know, if you look at some of the old Saturday Night Lives, you know, his little skit where he's a motivational speaker, but he lives in a van down by the river, you know, and but it's all body action and words,
Mm-hmm.
and it's just funny stuff,
Mm-hmm.
you know. And as a matter of fact, probably in some ways motivational because yeah, you could end up like that or whatever. So yeah, comedy really has changed, and but you know, as I said, my worry is more the word analysis of everything that we do,
Mm-hmm.
rather than you know, let's just do something funny and
Mm-hmm.
funny skits and whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I didn't know this new concept.
Yeah, and I think the interesting thing about it, and something that also is now on the playing field for comedy for the newest generation, is also the reels. You know, reels you
Oh
go
yeah,
through on your phone that are like very short clips,
yeah,
right? So, whereas you could sit down and watch a YouTube video that's like 30 minutes, 40
right,
minutes, it's a whole comedy sketch. I don't see the younger generation doing that anymore. It's more of okay, a
right,
quick
yeah,
funny, and carry on, right?
yeah,
Which I mean, we could go down a whole rabbit hole of the quick funny and the quick flashes of going through your reels over and over and what that entails in terms of dopamine.
yeah,
But I just think that that's a player in how comedy is perceived. And then another thing as well is the idea of being witty,
yeah,
you know, wordplay and, you know, subtleties that are comedic.
yeah,
I don't see a lot of witty anymore, to
yeah.
be honest, but maybe that's just my perspective.
Um, it could be. That's why I think all of our perspectives change over the years. And like the one thing I was just thinking when you're talking, like you talk about short videos, we used to have something in the newspaper called comic strips
Mm. Mhm.
and comic books,
Mhm.
and they were funny,
Mhm.
and they had like comic books were a longer story,
Mhm.
and the comic strip on your weekend newspaper were like 5 or 6 panels,
Mhm.
and there probably we used to be like the Toronto Star or something. They probably had 50.
So the old reels were the comic
Yeah,
strips.
they were. They are. They are.
That's fair.
Yeah, and like and quite honestly, didn't take any time. You could, like I remember having some favorites in that, but they were just funny. They
Mhm.
made you laugh at yourself and whatever. And
Mhm.
they dealt with everything across the board from social values to moral values, and they were really good. As a matter of fact, it'd be nice to see someone do that.
Mhm.
You know, and you could do it visually on a YouTube or whatever. Just short comic things that are really, really funny. There's no hidden agenda. There's nothing like that because that's the problem. A lot of times, some of the comedies shows
Mhm.
they have an agenda, and that's just not good.
Yeah, like I was saying earlier, like a good comedian is not going to make you feel like they're pressuring you into one
Right.
side thing or the other. It's so just be funny.
Yeah.
Just take the pressure off
Right.
things, you know?
Yeah.
which is important for that relief, you know? Very important social construct.
Yeah. And of course, nowadays, um, like even television, there's not too many funny shows. I mean, there used to be kind of comedy drama, and they were fun to watch. They didn't have any long-standing message. They were just life, you know.
Mm.
They started politicizing a tiny bit when, like, with All in the Family and all that in the '70s and that. But still, they just kind of expose things rather than criticize them, if you know what I mean. They
Yep.
exposed things that were happening
Mm-hmm.
that maybe weren't right,
Mm-hmm.
but you got to judge and say, oh, okay, maybe not. Like
Mm-hmm.
they didn't kind of state an opinion. Let's face it, there's people that still nowadays that I'm sure you'll find racist families and all that kind of thing, and that's just the way they are. And that was kind of like All in the Family, and it presented, and you kind of it made you look at yourself, made you reflect on yourself. Oh, yeah, boy, am I like that?
Mm-hmm.
You know, and
It bubbles everything up to
yeah,
the surface.
yeah. And I think that's what comedy's done. It's kind of led the charge,
Mm.
where it brings things to the surface that are underlying there that people know they're there, but they're not paying attention to, comes to the surface. And then we start thinking about it and dealing with it. Yeah, I think comedy's done a lot of great things. I mean, even some of the early kind of ones that they had a very strong moral family value in that, like Leave It to Beaver. Like if you've
Mm.
ever seen one of those old episodes, but they had a really underlying humor in it. Basically, one of the friends wasn't honest all the time. It was like they touched on everything. It
Mm-hmm.
was quite good, so it made you reflect. Oh, am I like that, or am I more like this, or you know? And of course, some of them purposely overstated righteous things that were too overstated, so you became aware. Am I like that?
Mm-hmm.
So you kind of did a lot of self-analysis,
Mm-hmm.
of yourself. I'm not sure some of the comedy, like shows we start looking at ourselves, reflect, because all the early ones in the '50s and '60s when for TV first came along, they really reflected life,
Mm.
and of course some of them took a moral high ground, some of them dug a little deeper and a little edgy,
Yeah.
but it was
And I
good.
mean, there's a certain point where I think sometimes humor can take certain graphic, especially
Yeah.
graphic things,
Oh
a
yeah.
little bit too far. It's not for me.
Yeah.
Um, but on the other side of things, if you were to go to the other extreme and be okay, if it had nothing controversial in it, if it had nothing shocking in it,
Yeah.
if it had nothing that is like high tension, high
Right.
topic, it wouldn't be funny.
Yeah.
Like,
No.
would it
No.
be
Yeah.
funny? Could you actually make it funny?
Yeah.
Is that like,
Yeah.
I don't know, That's brain rot isn't offensive in any way, I don't
Yeah.
think.
Yeah.
I don't know, I'm not up with the times. But like actual talking comedy, the funny stuff,
Yeah.
it's got difficult topics kind of necessarily as part of it. If you take out difficult topics, you're taking out 90% of comedy, and in my opinion, the actual funny comedy. So,
Yeah.
anyway.
No, and of course, Saturday Night Live has went in and out. Like, I don't like it as much as I used to, because basically they took topics and exaggerated it,
Mm.
and that's what makes things funny, because you start laughing at yourself. I think the best comedy is you can kind of see yourself in that picture somewhere in that play, so you can laugh at yourself. You know,
Mm-hmm.
and sure, there's some like one-liners and those kind of things are funny in that, but yeah, like a really good stand-up comedian that can do a half hour or so without going real crude in that, they're funny people,
Mm-hmm.
and you feel a lot better at the end of the show.
Mm-hmm.
And I just like to see more of it. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, so I guess the moral of the story for
yeah,
everyone listening
yeah,
is go make a joke.
yeah, yeah.
Go make a joke and go have fun and play
Yeah.
around with humor.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
No, yeah. Actually, it's a good idea. Quite honestly, since everybody's googling, Google there's some good old jokes. You know, kind of print them out and save them and tell them to your friends, and you'd be surprised at the laughs you'll get, from some of the old corny jokes, as we would call them, that weren't particularly offensive, but really kind of touched on what life is all about.
I have a book, and it's humor from Shakespeare. So it's things taken out of his
Oh
plays
yeah,
and like really looked to and like isolated as a joke, like as the joke they are, and it is friggin' hilarious.
yeah,
I love it. So I don't know. There's lots of good old stuff. Like
yeah,
go find
yeah,
good old joke
yeah,
books. I was surprised. I'm like, Shakespeare is funny, man.
yeah.
He's a funny guy.
Yeah. No, quite a lot of the old writings, there's underlying humor in many of them, like there's serious things in that, but underlying humor. So, yeah, so that's comedy and humor. Um, and we need to all laugh a little while. Um, and hopefully you don't analyze every word that we said today. We didn't tell any bad jokes or whatever, didn't tell any good jokes either. But anyway, as I said, our podcast really is trying to understand the difference in generations. And as we always say, you know, think for yourself. You know, you know, dig deep into whatever the subject matter is, and we cover everything. And we always want to emphasize this is just our opinion. But the one thing I always end with, form your own opinion. Don't be a parrot.
Thanks for listening in, everyone.